Before we begin, let me ask you something. If you're listening right now, tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is where you're listening. Because for me, it was 8:19 p.m., the night my parents decided my honesty was negotiable. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 26 years old. And the night my parents asked me to lie in court for my brother was the night I realized how conditional their love really was. They called it a family meeting. That phrase alone made my stomach tighten. In my family, meeting never meant discussion. It meant decisions had already been made, and my role was to agree quietly. We sat around the dining table like we always had. Same chairs, same overhead light, same framed family photo on the wall where we all looked happy in a way that didn't quite match reality. My brother sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight. He wouldn't look at me. My mother spoke first. "We need you to help us," she said carefully. My father slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were printed documents, court dates, statements, names highlighted in yellow. That's when I understood. This wasn't about help. This was about testimony. "You were there that night," my father said. "You can say it didn't happen the way they're claiming." I looked up slowly. "You want me to lie?" I said. My mother winced, not because of the lie, but because I'd said it out loud. "Don't use that word," she said. "We're asking you to protect your brother." Protect. That word felt heavy in my mouth. They explained the story they wanted me to tell, where I should pause, what I should not mention, which details mattered, and which ones could disappear. They'd rehearsed this. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding louder with every sentence. When they finished, my father leaned forward. "This stays in the family," he said. "You understand that, right?" I looked at my brother. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized something terrifying. They didn't ask if I could do it. They told me I had to, and when I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steadier than I felt. "I won't lie in court," I said. The room went silent. My mother's face hardened. My father's jaw clenched. And in that silence, I knew I had just chosen a path they would never forgive. They didn't give me time to process my refusal. They just kept talking. Like if they explained it enough times, I would eventually understand that honesty was optional. My father opened the folder again and tapped a page with his finger. "It wasn't that serious," he said. "Things got blown out of proportion." What he meant was this. My brother had been driving drunk. He ran a red light. He hit another car. The driver survived, barely. But the medical bills were enormous, and the police report was clear. Too clear. My brother was facing charges that could follow him for the rest of his life. And my parents had decided the solution wasn't accountability. It was me. "You were at the party," my mother said softly. "You can say he only had one drink. You can say you don't remember him drinking at all." I stared at her. "I wasn't even in the car," I said. "That's not the point," my father replied. "They just need doubt." Doubt. A word they repeated like it was harmless. They explained the plan in detail. How I should say I left early. How I should act unsure. How uncertainty would help their lawyer poke holes in the case. "You don't have to lie outright," my mother insisted. "Just be vague." As if bending the truth in court was somehow cleaner than breaking it. I asked them what would happen if the truth came out anyway. My father waved his hand dismissively. "It won't. We've thought this through." Of course they had. They had hired a good lawyer. They had money set aside. They had confidence. What they didn't have was my consent. "You're his sister," my mother said, her voice sharp now. "If you don't stand by him, who will?" I looked at my brother. Finally, he spoke. "Just do this one thing," he said quietly. "I won't forget it." That hurt more than anything else, because it wasn't remorse I heard in his voice. It was entitlement. I asked him if he remembered the other driver, if he remembered the ambulance, the broken glass, the blood. He looked away. My father's tone changed then, colder, more controlled. Do you know what happens if you don't help us? He asked. I waited. We can't support you anymore, he said. We won't. There it was. The condition. Help us lie, or lose your family. My mother nodded, like this was reasonable. We raised you, she said. This is what family does. I felt something inside me harden. Family doesn't ask you to destroy your integrity, so someone else can avoid consequences. Family doesn't hand you a script and call it loyalty. I pushed the folder back across the table. I'm not doing this, I said. My father's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. Then you're choosing strangers over your own blood, he said. No, I replied. I'm choosing the truth. That's when my mother said something I'll never forget. If you testify against him, she said, don't bother calling us again. They weren't bluffing. I could see it in their faces. The certainty, the anger, the betrayal they felt. Not because my brother had done something wrong, but because I refused to cover it up. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. I won't lie, I said one last time. Not for him. Not for you. No one stopped me when I walked out. No one followed. And as I closed the door behind me, I understood something that would take years to fully accept. I wasn't being cut off because I was wrong. I was being cut off because I refused to be useful in their lie. They didn't scream. They didn't chase me down the driveway. They did something worse. They erased me. The next morning, I woke up to notifications. Not from my family, but from my bank. My joint account with my parents was frozen. Then came the email from my father. Since you've chosen not to support your family, we won't be supporting you anymore. No discussion, no warning, no room for doubt. They followed through on every threat. My phone plan was canceled. My health insurance disappeared. The spare key to the house I'd grown up in stopped working. When I tried calling my mother, it went straight to voicemail. Blocked. I sat on my bed staring at my phone, realizing how quickly love can turn into leverage when it's conditional. I wasn't surprised. I was stunned by how organized it all was. They had prepared for this. They had a plan for my brother's defense, and a plan for me if I refused to play my part. I scraped together what I could, picked up extra shifts, ate cheap meals, lived small. What hurt most wasn't the money, it was the silence. No check-in, no, are you okay? No acknowledgement that I existed. It was like I had died, but only to them. A week later, my aunt called. She sounded uncomfortable. Your parents are saying you've turned your back on the family, she said. They're saying you're trying to ruin your brother's life. I almost laughed. Ruin. As if truth was the crime, as if the accident never happened. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct her. I had learned by then that people who believe lies don't want clarity. They want comfort. Court day approached fast. My parents' lawyer contacted me. He tried polite first, then persistent, then subtle threats disguised as concern. This would be easier if you cooperated, he said, for everyone. I told him the same thing I told my parents. I will tell the truth. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived alone. No family, no familiar faces, just me and the truth I refused to abandon. I saw my parents sitting behind my brother. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father stared straight ahead like I was a stranger. When I was called to testify, the room felt smaller. I raised my hand, swore the oath, and for the first time since that family meeting, I felt calm, because no matter what happened next, I knew this. I had already lost everything they were willing to give me. There was nothing left to threaten. When I spoke clearly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften anything. I didn't protect anyone at the expense of the truth. I answered only what I was asked. Nothing more, nothing less. And as I stepped down from the stand, I didn't look at my parents. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of what I'd done. And for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp and cold. I stood there alone for a moment, breathing, realizing something unexpected. Being cut off hurt, but lying would have destroyed me. And the real consequences of their choices? They hadn't even begun yet. The verdict didn't come that day, but the punishment from my parents did. By the time I got home from court, the locks on my childhood house had been changed. I know that because my key no longer worked, and because my father texted me a photo of my boxes stacked neatly on the porch. Pick them up by Friday. No signature, no explanation. Just logistics. I stood there staring at the message, realizing how final it was. Not dramatic, not emotional, just finished. They told everyone their version first. That I was unstable, that I hated my brother, that I was exaggerating what happened to get attention. Relatives stopped calling, invitations disappeared, family group chats went quiet. When people did reach out, it was never to ask what actually happened. It was to tell me I should be the bigger person. Funny how being bigger always meant being quieter. I moved my things into a tiny sublet near my job. Mattress on the floor. One chair. No decorations. I told myself it was temporary. At night, I lay awake replaying the meeting in my head, wondering if I could have said things differently, softer, smarter. Then I'd remember my brother's blood alcohol level, the photos of the wrecked car, the medical reports, and the doubt disappeared. The court dates kept coming. My parents avoided me completely. If we crossed paths in public, they looked through me like I was glass. The lawyers stopped calling. That's when I knew something had shifted. During the trial, cracks appeared in their story. Witnesses didn't match. Timelines conflicted. Statements unraveled under questioning. The truth has a way of doing that. One afternoon, my mother finally called. Her voice was thin, controlled. "You didn't have to be so thorough," she said. I almost didn't recognize her. I answered the questions. I replied, "That's all." She paused. "You've made things very hard for us." There it was. Not wrong, not illegal, just inconvenient. I didn't argue. I had learned that some people mistake silence for guilt and calm for weakness. I wasn't weak. I was done trying to be understood by people who only listened when it benefited them. When the verdict finally came down, I wasn't in the courtroom. I found out from a news alert on my phone. Guilty. Reduced sentence due to prior record being clean, but still guilty. The family fallout was immediate. My parents blamed the system, blamed the judge, blamed the other driver. They never blamed the person who had been drinking and driving. And quietly, without saying my name, they blamed me. They sold assets to pay legal fees, canceled trips, stopped returning calls from friends who asked too many questions. The image they'd protected for years cracked, and suddenly, the truth I refused to bury cost them far more than it ever cost me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear because I had lost my family's support, but I hadn't lost myself. And when they finally reached out again, months later, it wasn't to apologize. It was because the consequences they'd tried to avoid had arrived anyway. And this time, they had nothing left to offer me in exchange for silence. After the verdict, the house went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that settles when people realize there's no one left to blame but themselves. My brother was sentenced months later. Not the maximum. Not the minimum. Enough time to matter. Enough to follow him. Enough to change the trajectory my parents had worked so hard to protect. They told anyone who would listen that it was unfair. They didn't talk about the evidence. They didn't talk about the victim. They talked about reputation. Legal fees drained the savings they'd guarded for years. The lawyer they'd trusted distanced himself quickly once the case was over. Friends who'd defended them stopped calling when the story stopped changing. The truth doesn't need maintenance. Lies do. I heard about the fallout through other people. An aunt mentioned the house might be refinanced. A cousin said my parents had canceled a long-planned trip. Someone else said they'd stopped hosting holidays altogether. It wasn't dramatic. It was small losses stacking up. The kind that don't make headlines but reshape lives. Months passed without a word from them. Then, one afternoon, my father emailed me. No greeting, no apology, just a sentence. We didn't think it would end like this. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. Because that sentence said everything they still refused to say out loud. They didn't regret asking me to lie. They regretted that it didn't work. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Careful. Your brother's struggling," she said. "He could really use your support." I waited. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I wanted to talk. She asked if I would help carry the weight again. "I hope he gets the help he needs," I said. "But I won't lie for him. I won't cover for him. And I won't pretend none of this happened." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're holding a grudge." "No," I replied. "I'm holding the truth." That's when her tone shifted. Not sad, not angry, just tired. "You've always been difficult," she said. "You make things harder than they need to be." I almost smiled, because that was the clearest confession I'd ever heard. To them, honesty was a complication. Integrity was an inconvenience. And I had stopped being useful the moment I refused to bend. I didn't block them. I didn't argue. I let the space exist. Over time, the consequences they'd tried to outsource landed squarely where they belonged. Bills? Stress? Questions they couldn't answer without unraveling the story they'd told for years. And the family member they'd cut off? She was okay. I rebuilt slowly, quietly, on my own terms. I learned how to live without the constant pressure to protect someone else's mistakes. Learned how light life feels when you're not carrying secrets that aren't yours. The irony wasn't lost on me. They asked me to lie to keep their world intact. When I refused, their world fell apart anyway. Just later, and louder, and without me inside it, they didn't come back all at once. They tested the water. A text on my birthday, an email around the holidays, a vague message that said, "We should talk." No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd asked me to do, just the assumption that time had softened everything. It hadn't. The first real attempt came almost a year after the verdict. My father called me from a number I almost didn't recognize. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "We're family," he said immediately, like it was a password that still worked. "We shouldn't be strangers." I listened. He talked about how hard things had been, about stress, about money, about how my brother wasn't adjusting well. He didn't talk about the lie. He didn't talk about the ultimatum. He didn't talk about cutting me off. When he finally paused, I asked one question. "Do you think what you asked me to do was wrong?" There was a long silence. Then he said, "We did what we had to do." That told me everything. A few weeks later, my mother tried a different approach. She cried. She said she'd lost sleep, that she missed me, that she wished things could go back to normal. I asked her the same question. She avoided it. "You know how your brother is," she said. "We were desperate, desperate enough to sacrifice my integrity, not desperate enough to admit it." They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted relief. They wanted me back in the role I used to play, the reasonable one, the fixer, the one who absorbed consequences so no one else had to. I wasn't that person anymore. "I'm open to a relationship," I said carefully, "but not one built on pretending nothing happened." My mother sighed. "Why do you have to keep bringing this up?" "Because it mattered. Because it still mattered." They stopped reaching out after that. Not angrily, just quietly. The kind of silence that says, "If you won't make this easy, we won't try." And for the first time, that silence didn't hurt. It felt like closure. I understood then that some families don't break apart in a single dramatic moment. They fracture slowly, every time someone chooses comfort over truth. Every time accountability is seen as betrayal. I didn't lose them because I refused to lie. I lost them because I refused to disappear inside their version of events. And when they realized I wouldn't come back unless they changed, truly changed, they chose not to. That was their final decision, and I accepted it. I used to think losing my family would feel like falling off a cliff. Sudden, violent, irreversible. But the truth was quieter than that. It felt like setting something heavy down after carrying it for too long. Years passed. My brother served his sentence and came out changed. Not humbled, not accountable, just quieter. My parents aged faster than I expected. Stress does that. So does living inside a story you have to keep defending. We didn't reconcile, not because I was angry, but because nothing real was ever offered in return. No apology, no acknowledgement, no moment where they said, "We were wrong to ask you to lie." And without that, there was nothing to rebuild on. I built my life anyway. I advanced at work. I moved apartments. I surrounded myself with people who didn't ask me to compromise my values to belong. People who didn't need me to be silent to feel comfortable. Sometimes, someone would ask if I regretted it, if I wished I'd just said what my parents wanted so everything could have gone back to normal. The answer was always the same. Normal was a lie. Normal was a family that believed loyalty meant sacrificing one child to protect another. Normal was love with terms and conditions written in invisible ink. I didn't destroy my family. I refused to be destroyed for it. The last time I heard from my parents was through a mutual contact. They were struggling again. Financially, emotionally, socially. People had stopped believing their version of events. Questions lingered. They wanted my help, not my presence, not my truth, my usefulness. I declined. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just honestly. And that was the moment I understood the full cost of telling the truth. It cost me access. It cost me comfort. It cost me people who only loved me when I was convenient. But it gave me something far more valuable: peace. I sleep without rehearsing conversations in my head. I speak without wondering who I'm protecting. I walk into rooms without shrinking myself to keep others intact. Some people think integrity is expensive. It's not. Lies are. They compound. They spread. They demand interest forever. The truth asks for courage once, and then it lets you breathe. My parents paid the price of choosing a lie over accountability. I paid the price of choosing honesty over belonging, and I would make the same choice again. Because I didn't lose everything that night at the family meeting. I lost a role, and I kept myself